Hi everyone and welcome to FilmDirt. I recently watched Face Off and that got me into a Nicolas Cage mood, so I had to watch The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. And I love Nicolas Cage. When I heard this film was almost a setup on his character, I couldn't fail not to watch it. So we've got Nicolas Cage playing Nick Cage, which again is a version of himself. Probably an extreme version, if that's even possible, because you associate Nicolas Cage's acting style to be slightly manic. In a lot of his films, he's got his own style almost, doesn't he? And he's quite an intriguing personality as well, isn't he? So early on in the film, we've got him with his family, and it's very evident that he is almost within himself and ignores a lot of what is going on around him, and maybe ignores his daughter in particular to an extent. And it's all about him, and it's all self-centered. His daughter doesn't want to see a 100-year-old German film like he does. So that was quite amusing. You could almost believe the real Nicolas Cage would be completely immersed in film research. You always think of him as too clever for his own good, almost. He always comes across as very intelligent, and in interviews always strikes me very similar to Peter Weller, or I should say Dr. Peter Weller. And in those interviews, he always has so much information. It's a wealth of knowledge. When you ask him about one movie, he spirals into analysis of all sorts of themes. And I gather we get that with Nicolas Cage as well when you hear him talk about films. But I saw him in an interview recently, and I don't know if I'm mistaken, but isn't his favourite movie of his own Face Off? And with that film, we're not going into any Shakespearean areas, are we? It just is what it is, just a really fun movie. And here, when you catch him talking to a younger version of himself, he's reminiscing about his own career back then. And when he's arguing as well with himself, that's quite funny. I have to point out the de-aging on the younger version of himself, which is called Nicky. I think he was called Nicky Cage. He's that's quite funny. That did make me laugh during the film. I think they went a little bit they dialed up the de-aging a little bit too far. He's almost blurry, and that's a shame. You could have dialed it down. And some of the best de-aging I saw, which wasn't even that much, it was in Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think it was episode 5, when we get to see Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor back during I think it was Attack of the Clones era, wasn't it? And they did look slightly younger, but not too much. They still looked like they were 30s, 40s, but it wasn't really softened to the max to take you out of the scene. And it was a fantastic scene there, and you're still with it even though they are slightly de-aged. And I wish I'd done that here with Nicky Cage just so we're not taken out of the film. But that's my opinion. I just felt it was a bit too soft focus. So we're seeing he is possibly a little bit of a spent force. He doesn't get the dream role that he was going all out for, and he probably ruined it for himself by just getting on the director's nerves, didn't he? But then he gets the offer to see, is it an old friend of his, played by Pedro Pascal, as Harvey, out there on what appears to be a secluded island, which almost reminded me of a Bond villain type scenario. And that must have made his family overjoyed, just to get rid of him for a little while, because he's getting on both of their nerves. And now it's time to get on someone else's nerves. But we see Pedro Pascal, who I've always enjoyed him in other films, and he's fantastic here. He almost seems as eccentric as Nick Cage is himself. And therefore their friendship is quite believable, and you know that those two, with their personalities, they get on like a house on fire. Now, it is really played for laughs for the most part, and then we do get an action scene in the second half of the film, which wasn't great in my book. And I'm kind of regretting that it didn't go down a darker path, because you think if they're really going to be warts and all with this Nick Cage character, they could have gone down the drugs and alcohol route on a secluded island and go in that direction. But surprisingly they didn't. They probably want to get a more wholesome audience. I just think we spent a little bit too long on this car chase, which was great and it was competently filmed, but didn't really enjoy it if I'm honest. I do like the CIA angle where they're recruiting him to spy on Harvey. That was a nice story thread. And just imagining Nick Cage as a spy playing himself, that's quite amusing to me. But overall, there's some nice little story threads here. I do like the idea of big characters you know from the acting world playing themselves or sending up themselves almost. And Nick Cage is a perfect example of a character you think could just be completely over the top. And I love all the mentions of his previous films scattered throughout this film. And when we hear classics like Face Off and National Treasure and Con Air, and it always makes me smile whenever anyone mentions those films. But the negatives are, like I said earlier, I just think there's a few sections here which isn't really that interesting. The whole car chase, and they didn't go in directions I probably expected and maybe wanted them to go down. Drugs and alcohol angle and all this other debauchery they could have explored. And Pedro Pascal's character is called Harvey. Is that a send-off of Harvey Weinstein, maybe? Who knows, but he is certainly a mad character, as is Nick Cage as well, and his alter ego Nicky Cage. It's just so funny, isn't it? So it's time to give this movie a score. I'm going to say 3.5 stars. I think it's a very decent watch, and one of those I may put on again maybe in a year or two, and I may even like it more, who knows. I might come back with an update in the future. So those are my thoughts on The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. And just to leave you with a little bit about myself, as this is still a fairly new channel, I love to chat with people about movies, and I only give my own opinion, so I'm not paid for by any of the studios. And I don't take incentives like free tickets, unlike some other channels. So thanks again for joining me. It was great speaking to you, and I'll be back on the channel with another review soon. All the best. Take care.